Awesome. Welcome back, everyone, to Reimagined, a Hidden Compass series. I am your always host, Lauren Eckert, and I am so thrilled to be joined today by two friends and inspiring colleagues, Kate Musset and Kasey Stirling. Kate and Kasey are both master's students in the Indigenous Fisheries Center at University of British Columbia, UBC. Kate is a settler scientist who holds a BA in anthropology and honors from UBC and has been involved in interdisciplinary work throughout her time in academia and beyond. Kasey, and feel free to correct me on any of these pronunciations, is in Etuaptmumk, Mi'kmaq, Métis, and Acadian, and holds a bachelor's in Casey's last name, and holds a bachelor's of science in molecular biology and biochemistry, and also a chartered herbalist diploma, which I didn't realize until I was prepping this, and that's extremely cool. We're going to have to talk about that. Kasey has spent her life walking between the worlds of Western and Indigenous knowledges and applies the lessons learned there in her work in her master's. So I'm so excited to talk to you both today. Welcome.
Thank you. And your pronunciations were good. But yeah, it's in Etuaptmumk. It's not meant to be said with English words.
Yeah.
Mi'kmaq, Métis, and Acadian. Yeah.
Close. I've been trying to learn the pronunciation for months and I still can't get it.
It took me months to learn.
Someday.
Yeah. Trying is a big part of it. We'll continue to do our best, Kate.
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, thank you. That's gracious, Kasey. So before we launch into talking about, so many things. So a bit of context for listeners. In this series, Reimagined, folks who've been watching will know we've talked about things like reconsidering commonly used words with heavy histories like explore and discover. We've also talked about imagining the new worlds that lie at the interface of other intersecting worlds. And another sort of overarching theme that we like to pursue in this series is how individuals are escaping their comfort zones to do better science, to do different storytelling, and towards better ways of being in the world. And you two happen to fall into all of those categories. And so as I was prepping this interview, I was like, wait, I can't not go all of these directions. So we'll be a bit all over the place, but the umbrella of these three topics matches your work so well. So I didn't want to exclude any of that. But before we get into those topics, I'd love to hear a little bit from both of you about your current project.
Sure. Yeah. So we're working with the First Nations Fisheries Legacy Fund, which is an organization here in what is now known as Vancouver, the Lower Mainland, with 6 of the Lower Mainland First Nations: Musqueam, Katzie, Kwantlen, Tsawwassen, Coquitlam, and Tsleil-Waututh. And we're working on a project. I feel like I could talk about this for hours and hours, but our project is aiming to co-create a framework for fish and fish habitat health assessment that effectively weaves together Indigenous science and Western science. So Kasey and I are coming at this from very different backgrounds, but we've found that it's a pretty beautiful thing. It's pretty elegant, as Kasey would say, the ways that we can work together in this, because I come from an arts background and more social science, and Kasey is a biochemist by trade. So Kasey, what do you want to add?
Yeah, there's definitely been a lot of learning that we've done together, and I don't think that we could do this without each other, that's for sure, or our partners. And not only are we partnering with the nations, but we're partnering with each other on this side of the academic front, because all of our experiences are necessary for this kind of project to go forward. And we've been experiencing a lot of things that we figured we'd run into, and then a lot of unexpected things, but that have brought about some really great new directions for the project. And we're just going to keep coming up against things, and it's kind of fun to just figure it all out together, and we're really supportive. So that helped a lot in this kind of work.
I'm so glad you guys have this partnership. It's something I think about in the context of stepping out of comfort zones. In terms of academia, it is very typical, especially for graduate students, to be very isolated in their pursuits. And of course, you guys are supervised by the wonderful Dr. Andrea Reed, whose work we will hyperlink below this video. But I think it's really wonderful that you guys are taking on what might be considered a new approach in sort of a Western academic context in terms of partnering on a project, but makes so much sense, especially given your goals. Can you talk about the word co-creation a little bit? That is something that I think is critical to understand in your work and sounds simple, but isn't, and is a big part of what excites me about what you guys do.
Yeah. Well, this project didn't originate within the academic institution. Nations that we are working with had this idea and brought it to us and asked for help with some of the skills that we have, but it is their project and we're helping with it. You know, it's not something that, as is the case in a lot of academic history, academics think they know what needs to be done, they know what needs to be studied, and that they can figure out what what they can do very paternalistic to help someone else. That's not the case in this project. And so it originated with the nations that we're working with, and it's based off of the Maori Cultural Health Index that was co-created between the Maori and the Aotearoa, or New Zealand, now known as New Zealand government. And trying to put it in the Canadian context is a bit of a different situation. So we are conducting a lot of workshops, and we did 3 community workshops, which was like 9 hours plus a little bit in the spring and then the nations, and we had a lot more people join than we expected, which was really it was wonderful to see, because there is such support for this project and it's needed to go through. And we're at the end of this month also, after some of the work that we've put together and received permission from the nations during those workshops, we're about to have another one just to kind of update and make sure that everything is going the way that the nations agree is a good way to go about it, and sort of give an update on what's been done and then what we're about to do in the next step, and keep properly consulting. I know that word consultation is used a lot, but we're actually consulting, in that we don't do anything without the chance for our nation partners to be able to voice concerns, support, questions, or any other thing that they think is necessary in this project, and to allow us to make sure that we are doing the project in the way that they see as the best way forward.
Yeah, I was just listening to you talk, Kasey. I realized that I think our experience with co-creation has been, it's like the little things, co-creating isn't sitting down at a table and writing a document together. It's the conversations, it's the workshops, it's the emails and phone calls, and like all of these other sorts of collaborations we have with folks within community, which has been really fantastic. And also it's been a great opportunity for Kasey and I to like hone in our skill set in terms of how we can be of use to nations. We're inherently different, in my being a settler scientist and Kasey being an Indigenous scientist, but neither of us are from the nations that we're working with. And so it's been this really incredible exercise, and kind of, obviously we have our goals, we want to finish our masters, but kind of putting aside our own like egos, so to speak, and asking what we can do and how we can help, and what our skill sets can do. And I think that's what co-creating has meant to us on the whole.
That's fantastic. A number of things jump out at me as you talk through the process and what you've learned from it. Iterative ways to do research are unusual, especially in a paternalistic Western academic framework. There's such a legacy of parachute science, where a scientist says, this is the plan, I am going to do it, and steps into that space. Part of this is because of the way Western science is built as well, because of the process, and having space for an iterative approach where you have a workshop and then get back to the drawing table and say, okay, based on this feedback, we need to redefine or create new goals or create new process. And I think that's great. And then the other thing that jumps out is just relationship. Kate, I love you talk about the little things, emails, the communications, the conversations, often over coffee, often informal, building relationship is so fundamental to co-creation, but again, is outside often the scope of what's envisioned by our Western institutions as fundamental. So great to get that overview from you guys, and also learn about how it's impacted you, how the research has changed you, how the process has changed you. So that's awesome. I'm interested in this context, and feel free to broaden this out however you see fit. We in this series have talked about words like explore and discover, and there are a number of institutions that use these words to describe their scientists, and it's often used in academic articles. I know I've used it frequently, but it is this word that is fundamentally based in, at least for much of its history, exploitation and violence. What are your thoughts on those words and how they come up in science, and if they are something we can reimagine, or if we need new ways to talk about and think about these things?
I remember when this project first started and we were writing the first grant applications, like the first documents that we were responsible for. I sent a draft to Andrea, and she came back with a ton of comments, one of which was, you use this word explore so much, and why? And like, we should think about the implications of that. And since then, I've become hyper aware of it. And what I've realized is that the reason why I liked to use the word explore was because it had this essence of curiosity, but there are so many other words that encompass that, and so many other like incredible words that I'm still in the process of trying to figure out what else I can use. But things like unpack is a good one. I mean, that's a very generic one, but just understanding like what exactly my intentions are with words like explore or discover, and then trying to find something that encompasses it better. There's something more specific that can be used in each instance. So it's been great it was good to be called out on. It's been great to be learning about it.
Yeah, and it's a conversation that Kate and I always have as we're going about the work that we do, not necessarily always centered on language specifically as in each individual word, but there's definitely a difference between impact and intent. And I'm sure that even though I'm Indigenous, we're not all infallible. And at the beginning of my degrees in academia, it was probably something I used quite a bit. We all are in the process of learning, and we can't be, blamed for not knowing what we don't know. If we don't understand those implications and those impacts, then we that's not our individual faults. It's not something that's unforgivable, but the point is to learn from what we do and to eventually grow through it, and understand the implications and the impacts of what we say. It might not be what someone intends to put out as an impact, but like Kate was saying, she's now hyper aware of that word. But a lot of Indigenous scientists are constantly hyper aware of things that other non-Indigenous people are just not aware of at all. So even though you may have the best intentions, and this is something I tell people a lot, that like, believe me, I know you don't mean it. I get it. You don't have to tell me you don't mean it. I know. But that's not the point. The point is recognizing, like, oh, yeah, no, you're right. I'm sorry. I will try to do better next time, and I'll try to grow from that, because it is our responsibility as academics to grow and do better work as we just keep growing and moving forward.
Responsibility is such an important thing to emphasize in this space, and as academics and as humans. I beautifully said by both of you. I think also was just reflecting as you were talking on, I think a value inherent in academia is success, and to not talk about our foibles and failures. And I will be the first to say I have made massive, impactful mistakes throughout my work at these interfaces, despite best intentions. And it's something I will continue to grapple with. And it's not something that I want to put the burden on Indigenous nations, colleagues, scholars to educate me out of. But unfortunately, we're humans and we make mistakes. But I like, both of you had unique but excellent perspectives that you so eloquently communicated this idea that we're all on a journey, and but on that journey we have to make sure we are constantly disentangling impacts from intent, because having good intent does not make all of our actions appropriate. But that's part of why these co-creation processes create such good space for turning intent into positive impact instead of negative impact. Kate, I think you're going to jump in and add something.
Yeah, I was just going to say that that's something that Kasey has taught me and continues to teach me all the time, is the importance of language. That point she just made about, I know that's not what they meant, but that's what they said, is something that we talk about all the time, something that she calls me out for, which I'm grateful for. And also like wildly grateful that she has taken on the responsibility of like helping me through this journey. It's just been fantastic. But Kasey and I are in this like really incredibly privileged position of having this platform on which to speak from, this academic platform. And so back to this conversation about language and intent, like since we have this opportunity to share language, why would we not take advantage of that to use language to the best of its ability, and be using the language and deliver a message that has been co-created, and provide the academic institution with some potential pathways to rewrite its negative history. So I look forward to what Kasey and I do.
Oh God, me too. That was wonderfully said. Yeah, and language is interesting. This is a whole nother conversation. We probably shouldn't launch into it, but I often think about, that English itself is the language of violence of the colonizer for so many people in this place now known as Canada, and so many places now known as whatever colonial term they're known as. But in particular, there are these words that, yeah, I'm right with you, Kate. Like explore was like I still struggle for alternatives, especially when talking about like interfaces or abstract things. But it is so important to go through this journey of like, what's going on with me wanting to rely on this word here, especially given its history and my positionality to that history, right? Like, anyway, I don't want to totally get us going off on a linguistic journey, though that's such a big part of things, as you've said. But I want to take the opportunity of talking to you both. So we've talked about co-creation a lot, and we've alluded to your lives and your work being at the interface of academia, Western institutions, Western knowledge, Indigenous knowledge systems, Indigenous institutions, and probably a number of other intersections too. So I wondered if you could share with folks listening a little bit about Etuaptmumk, or Two-Eyed Seeing, as a framework that bridges these otherwise distant intersections.
Yeah. Etuaptmumk is definitely a often misunderstood concept in the work that we do and with the people that we meet. And I think I'm probably going to be myself just relearning what that means for me at different points in time. It's not consistent, it's not constant. Etuaptmumk, as sort of described by Elder Dr. Albert Marshall, who's also Mi'kmaq, is about seeing with sort of both perspectives, with both eyes, and that is about understanding something from, in our case, it often is a Western science perspective, and also this perspective of understanding the context in which Indigenous knowledge and histories and colonialism has affected how Western knowledge interacts with Indigenous knowledge. And that's something that I think is often a little bit easier, not a lot easier, but a little bit easier for Indigenous scientists, because I've been trained in a very Western science framework for a number of years, but I've also grown up with culture, and I've seen a lot of conflicts and parallels in various knowledge systems that I've learned and been gifted with throughout my life, but it's not easy to kind of put these together. And people often talk about braiding and weaving knowledges, which are great terms, but they're often used as words and not as actions, because it's not easy, and not all knowledge systems are able to be interwoven or braided. There are conflicts that can't always be resolved just by a simple thought experiment or a simple action. These are very difficult things that you really need to be aware of at every step of the process when you're making these decisions, and be very conscious of them as you go through. It takes a lot more time and energy, and you need to be questioning and reevaluating your goals as partners, as individuals, throughout whatever work you're doing at every step, to make sure that you are doing the work properly, or at least to the best of your ability, and you're not cutting corners just because of the ease of it.
Yeah, another really incredible thing that Kasey and Andrea and our partners here on this project have taught me is that knowledge isn't just about receiving it, it's about receiving it and then action. So that's how I have seen two-eyed seeing in the context of what I do, because another huge misunderstanding is that two-eyed seeing is something that everybody can have. And like, I don't mean to make hard and fast statements, but two-eyed seeing is only something that folks who hold other forms of knowledge can have. So for me, I can't be someone who sees with both eyes because I just have the one. However, two-eyed seeing for me is recognizing my privilege, recognizing my place, and being an actor within a greater movement of two-eyed seeing. So rather acting as an individual, for me, it's acting within a greater space of hoping, of a place of coming together for common goals, which is exactly what this, like me and Kasey as our relationship, as well as this project, like that's what two-eyed seeing means to me. And like to get to be a part of that in some way or another has been absolutely incredible for me. But I think that's something that folks need to be aware of, is that settlers can't as individuals can't have two-eyed seeing, can't use two-eyed seeing.
Absolutely, yes. They can be. So for listeners who may be less familiar with two-eyed seeing or Etuaptmumk, I will hyperlink the sort of formalization of Etuaptmumk by Dr. Albert Marshall in the show notes, so you can check that out. It's a concept that is cross-cultural, has been a fundamental framework for many Indigenous nations throughout time, takes slightly different forms, but those forms follow a similar approach, which is that idea that you can have two divergent knowledge systems, like Kasey mentioned, with very different values and life ways and constructs and pedagogies and all of these things, and trying to force them together. While it may sometimes provide opportunities or work, you can't always consistently do. So instead, you can offer a bridge between two equally valid, equally important systems by extending, hands or knowledge ways, or however you want to frame that, out to reach each other. And I think what, Kate brought up is important to emphasize, that as settlers, we can be we can provide a lens and a collaborative spirit and deep work to make sure that collaborative spirit is avoiding the power imbalances that have existed for a very long time in our Western institutions. But ultimately, yeah, I think you brought up early on that Etuaptmumk, Kasey, is so context specific. I think in Western society in particular, we seek easy rules. We seek frameworks that can be applied the same way, regardless of geography and culture and history. And Etuaptmumk is the opposite of that. It is saying, it is a call to context. It is a call to individuality. It's a call to complexity. And so, yeah, for anyone who wants to learn more about framework and the folks over the world over who enact it, who participate in it, who speak to it, we'll have a link in TED Talk and Dr. Albert Marshall's work. I'm keeping an eye on time, and I know we could all talk forever. So I have maybe one final question, and feel free to sort of spiral off of it. So I always wonder for folks, you both work incredibly hard, internally and externally, in the work that you do. And I'm very grateful for the work that you do. What future do you dream of? And that you could answer that about this project, or you can answer about it, generations beyond you, however you best envision it.
Kasey and I were just talking about this the other day, about this project specifically. We just hope that, sorry, I don't mean to speak for both of us, but we just hope that it has a positive impact. Like, I think our biggest fear is that this project ends up just being another master's project that like sits in a library somewhere. We want this to be less about what we write and what we submit, and more about the impact it has on the communities we're working with communities outside of those we're working with the future generations of the communities that we're working with. Like, we just hope it has impact. And I hope it will. I think it will. That's the way it's looking, at least. So I think that's the big goal for us. And in general, for me, I think similar to what I was saying earlier, like, I just hope to always be in support of those who protect water. I have been a water person my whole life, and I will continue to be in lives beyond this one. So that, yeah, my future is water. I don't know what form that'll take. I tell Kasey every day I have a new dream job, but that's where I'll be, and hopefully with Kasey somewhere.
Yeah, Kate and I always muse about having like a little co-op homestead somewhere, but housing prices, we'll see what happens.
Count me in.
But yeah, awesome. I think since I was pretty young, I knew that I had some skills that were maybe first and foremost my stubbornness that were going to allow me to try to be a tool for returning agency to nations. I probably could not have put those into words like that until very recently, but that was what the goal was. And it's something that I'm increasingly seeing. Everybody wants to hire Indigenous scientists. There aren't so many of us, so we're very stretched and we are overwhelmed often, and some of it is definitely, often in my case, because of what we put up on ourselves. But I hope that if nothing else, I can, being trained in biochemistry and seeing the amazing things that can come out of the kind of information we can get from that. And honestly, I could talk about nucleic acids as DNA all day, because I think they're absolutely elegant and an amazing system. Yeah, but so there's so much that we can learn from it. And I think that with the ways that we are now as nations allowed more and more frequently to be able to steward our lands in the ways that we have for millennia, but as contemporary people, we're also taking in new technologies and seeing how we can employ them to better steward the lands that we have in modern context when we're dealing with things like pollution and industrial projects. I really think that this is still new for nations to see how we can use that to the best of our abilities. And I'm hoping that I can sort of, I don't know, help the transition a little bit, because I think there's a lot of power in that kind of information. And we're beginning to see some of this really take hold. And it's exciting for me as an Indigen nerd, like I seeing some of these Indigenous owned genomics labs that are coming up. I am, there's a little inkling in the back of my head that I think it would be super cool to have a network of Indigenous owned labs that specialize in all sorts of different things, so that we can decentralize the knowledge systems that we have and to work together collaboratively as nations to really create a force of knowledge. That's going to take a long time. So that might be what I do for the rest of my career. And if that's the case, then I'm happy with it.
Hell yeah, that is a beautiful thought. I should add too, we didn't get into this, but Kasey, your work with kids and the work I've seen via both of you with youth in the Tsawwassen Nation is such a part of this as well. Like I don't want to leave that behind. We don't have a ton of time to get into it, but I just want to acknowledge that that is one way that you guys do this work, is through education, communication with youth, with kids. And it is so incredible watching them get excited and starry-eyed when you describe visions for the future. So I'm so grateful for both of you. I'm so grateful for your time today as busy, overwhelmed grad students. This matters a lot, and I always love chatting with you both. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lauren. It's been a pleasure. Always happy to chat about this stuff.
Yeah, we should
Yes.
have you back in many months to talk about how things are going. Do you either of you have like social media accounts, hyperlinks, anything you want to direct people towards at the end of this video?
Not very active, but yeah. One benefit of having a name that nobody can spell is that nobody has your handle. So mine's pretty easy to remember. It's just usually at Kasey.Stirling.
Wonderful.
That's nice. Yeah.
I'm working on potentially starting a Twitter account. I've been grappling with how most effectively to communicate science, and I have a weird thing with social media, but
also
it might be the way.
It's a double-edged sword. So
yeah. Stay
well,
tuned.
if you get that, we will hyperlink it in
Great.
this. Well, thank you so much. We're very grateful for you both.